The words hit her like a slap. You have until nightfall to gather your things and leave. If you're still on these grounds when the sun sets, I'll have the guards drag you out. Ivy stared at her stepmother, waiting for the cruel smile to crack, for the woman to admit this was just another twisted game. But Lady Ashford's face remained cold as marble, her pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You can't do this. Ivy's voice came out steadier than she felt. This is my father's house, my home. Your father is dead. Lady Ashford smoothed her silk skirts. And his will left everything to me. The house, the lands, the fortune. All of it. You're entitled to nothing. That's not possible. He wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Leave his precious daughter penniless? Her stepmother's laugh was like breaking glass. He did. Perhaps he finally realized what a disappointment you are. An Omega daughter with a weak wolf. Unmarried at 22. Utterly useless. Ivy's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rage. She wanted to tell this woman that her father had loved her, that he would never have abandoned her like this, that something was wrong. But Lady Ashford held the will. Lady Ashford held the power. And Ivy had nothing. Where am I supposed to go? She asked quietly. I have no money, no family. You're sending me out with nothing. That's not my concern. Lady Ashford turned away, already dismissing her. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you failed to secure a husband. A woman your age, still unwed. It's shameful, really. But then, what man would want you? You're plain, poor, and powerless. The trifecta of undesirable. The words landed in the soft places Ivy had spent years trying to protect. Plain, poor, powerless. She'd heard them before, whispered behind her back at parties, muttered by suitors who lost interest the moment they learned her wolf was weak. She'd learned to pretend they didn't hurt. She was still pretending. You have 4 hours? Lady Ashford swept toward the door. I suggest you use them wisely. And then she was gone, and Ivy was alone in the parlour of the house where she'd grown up, surrounded by furniture and paintings and memories that were no longer hers. 4 hours. She had 4 hours to pack her entire life into whatever she could carry, and then she would be cast out into the October cold with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her father had been dead for 3 months. 3 months of watching Lady Ashford's mask slip, watching the false sympathy curdle into open contempt. 3 months of whispered conversations with solicitors and sealed documents and meaningful glances that excluded Ivy from every discussion about the estate. She should have seen this coming, but she'd been too busy grieving to notice the knife being sharpened behind her back. Ivy climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her former bedroom, and began to pack. She took only what she could carry: a few dresses, her mother's locket, a miniature portrait of her father, and a small pouch of coins she'd hidden beneath a floorboard years ago. Emergency money, she'd called it, never imagining the emergency would be this. The sun was already beginning its descent when she slipped out the servants' entrance, unwilling to give Lady Ashford the satisfaction of watching her leave through the front door. She had no destination, no plan, just the vague idea that she would walk to the village and perhaps find work as a seamstress or a maid. She was educated enough to teach, skilled enough to sew. Surely someone would take her in. Surely. The road wound through the forest that bordered her father's estate. No, Lady Ashford's estate now. And Ivy walked quickly, trying to outpace the setting sun. Everyone knew the forest was dangerous after dark. Wolves roamed these woods. Not Lycans like herself, but wild wolves, territorial and hungry. and worse things, if the stories were true. She was so focused on the path ahead that she didn't notice the riders until they were almost upon her. Well, well, what do we have here? Ivy spun, her heart lurching into her throat. 3 men on horseback blocked the road behind her. They wore no insignia, no uniforms, just rough travelling clothes and the kind of smiles that made her skin crawl. A little lamb, lost in the woods. The leader swung down from his horse, his eyes raking over her in a way that made her want to disappear. And all alone, too. That's not safe, sweetheart. Dangerous creatures in these parts. Ivy backed away, clutching her bag to her chest. I don't want any trouble. I'm just passing through. Hear that, boys? She doesn't want any trouble. The man advanced, and his companions dismounted behind him. Neither do we. Just a bit of company is all. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be wandering alone at night. Stay away from me. He lunged. Ivy ran. She made it 3 steps before a hand closed around her arm and yanked her backward. She hit the ground hard, her bag flying from her grip, her mother's locket biting into her chest. Feisty little thing, aren't you? The leader loomed over her, his face twisted with cruel amusement. I like that. Makes it more. A growl split the air. Not a human sound. Something deeper, primal, vibrating through the ground and into Ivy's bones. The men froze, their expressions shifting from predatory to terrified in the span of a heartbeat. What the hell was... The wolf exploded from the trees. It was massive, larger than any wolf Ivy had ever seen, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that burned like molten gold. It moved like liquid shadow, silent and deadly, placing itself between Ivy and the men. The leader scrambled backward. Shit, that's no ordinary wolf. The beast snarled, and the sound was enough to send all 3 men fleeing to their horses. They were gone in seconds, hoofbeats thundering down the road, leaving Ivy alone with the creature that had saved her. She should run. She should be terrified. A wolf this size could tear her apart without effort. But something kept her frozen in place. Something about those golden eyes, fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost human. The wolf's form began to shift. Bones cracked and reformed. Fur receded into skin. And where the beast had stood, a man now rose to his full height. He was enormous, taller than anyone she'd ever seen, with broad shoulders that blocked out the dying light. His dark hair was wild, his jaw sharp, his features carved from shadow and stone. And his eyes, those same golden eyes, burned as they swept over her. Are you hurt? His voice was deep, rougher than she expected, as if the wolf still lingered in his throat. Ivy shook her head, not trusting her own voice. The man moved toward her, and she flinched instinctively. He stopped immediately, his expression flickering with something she couldn't name. I'm not going to hurt you. He crouched, bringing himself closer to her level, and extended a hand. Can you stand? She stared at his hand, large, calloused, capable of violence she'd just witnessed, but offered gently, palm up, waiting. She took it. He pulled her to her feet effortlessly, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could catch his scent, pine and smoke, and something wild that made her dormant wolf stir for the first time in years. His nostrils flared, his golden eyes widened. You, he breathed. Ivy blinked. What? But he wasn't listening. He was staring at her like she was a ghost, like she was a miracle, like she was something he'd been searching for his entire life. What's your name? He demanded. Ivy. Ivy Ashford. Well, just Ivy now, I suppose. I don't. Where were you going? Why are you alone on this road at nightfall? The questions came rapid fire, and Ivy's head spun trying to keep up. I was I was sent away. My stepmother, she took everything. The house, the money, all of it. I have nowhere to go. Something dark flashed across his face. Something dangerous. Sent away, he repeated. Cast out, to wander the roads at night, alone and unprotected. Yes, but who are you? How did you? I am Kieran. His jaw tightened. Kieran Voss, King of the Northern Territories. And you? His golden eyes blazed with sudden fierce certainty. You are not going anywhere. Ivy stared at him. King. The Lycan King. The most powerful man in the realm, standing before her on a forest road, looking at her like she was the answer to a question she didn't understand. I can't. You were told to leave before nightfall. His voice dropped, a growl threading through the words. But I'm telling you something different. He stepped closer, his massive frame blocking out the last rays of the setting sun. You stay. Ivy had no memory of agreeing. One moment she was standing on the darkening road, staring up at a man who claimed to be the Lycan King. The next, she was mounted on his horse. When had a horse appeared? With his massive body warm behind her and his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. I can walk, she managed, her voice thin. You've been walking all day. His breath stirred her hair. And you're shaking. She was. She hadn't noticed until he said it, but tremors were running through her entire body. Aftershocks from the attack, from the adrenaline, from the sheer, overwhelming strangeness of everything that had happened in the last hour. Where are you taking me? My estate. It's not far. You can't just. I can. His voice was calm, certain. And I am. Ivy wanted to argue. She wanted to demand he stop the horse and let her off, to insist that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But the truth was, she had nowhere to go, no plan, no resources. If he hadn't appeared when he did, those men would have. She shuddered, and his arms tightened around her. You're safe now, he said quietly. No one will ever touch you like that again. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to process any of this. The Lycan King's estate emerged from the forest like something out of a dream. A massive stone manor, ancient and imposing, with warm light spilling from its windows and guards stationed at the gates. The guards snapped to attention as Kieran rode through, their eyes widening when they saw the woman in his arms. He dismounted first, then reached up to lift her down. His hands spanned her waist, holding her like she weighed nothing, and when he set her on her feet, he didn't immediately let go. Can you walk? She nodded, even though her legs felt like water. He released her but stayed close, one hand hovering at the small of her back as he guided her inside. Servants materialized from nowhere, efficient, silent, asking no questions. Within moments, Ivy found herself ushered into a grand sitting room with a fire blazing in the hearth and a tray of food waiting on a side table. Eat, Kieran said. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. He was right. Lady Ashford had been rationing her food for weeks, just another petty cruelty in a long list of them. Ivy's stomach cramped at the sight of fresh bread, roasted meat, cheese, fruit. She didn't move toward it. Why are you doing this? She asked instead. Kieran had been pacing near the window. He stopped, turning to face her. What do you know about mate bonds? The question caught her off guard. Mate bonds? The fated mate stories? They're not stories. She shook her head. They're rare. Almost unheard of. Most Lycans never… I know. He moved closer, his golden eyes intent on her face. I've lived for 261 years. I've watched friends and allies find their mates, watched the bonds transform them, and I've waited. Year after year, decade after decade, century after century, waited for a scent, a feeling, something that would tell me she existed. Ivy's heart was pounding. She didn't want to understand what he was saying. She didn't want to connect the pieces into a picture that made no sense. When I caught your scent on the road, he continued, his voice dropping lower, my wolf recognized you instantly. Mine. That's all he could say. Mine, mine, mine. After 200 years of silence, he finally found what he was searching for. That's impossible. The words came out strangled. I'm no one. I'm an omega with a wolf so weak she barely exists. You're my mate. He said it like fact, like gravity, like something that simply was. And I don't care about your rank, or your wolf, or whatever lies you've been told about yourself. You're mine, Ivy. You have been, since before you were born. I just had to find you. She backed away until her legs hit a chair. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. The simple request threw her. I want to know you, he said. Everything. Where you grew up, what you love, what you fear, what makes you laugh. He paused. What made you so certain you're worthless? The last question hit too close to home. Ivy looked away, staring at the fire instead of his too perceptive eyes. My stepmother, she heard herself say. She married my father when I was 12, after my mother died. She swallowed. At first, she pretended to care about me, but once she realized what I was, an omega, a weak wolf, an embarrassment to the family bloodline, she stopped pretending. And your father? He loved me. Her throat tightened. But he was sick the last few years. He didn't see how she treated me when he wasn't watching. Or maybe he did, and was too tired to fight about it. She pulled her mother's locket from beneath her dress, running her thumb over the worn gold. He died 3 months ago, and she waited just long enough to secure the will before throwing me out. The will. Kieran's voice had gone dangerously soft. She claimed your father left her everything. She showed me the documents, his signature, his seal. Did you read them yourself? Ivy blinked. No. She wouldn't let me. She said it would only cause more pain. Something dark flickered across Kieran's face. I'll have my solicitors look into it. Wills can be forged. Seals can be stolen. If that woman cheated you out of your inheritance, it doesn't matter. Ivy shook her head. Even if the will is false, I can't fight her. I have no money, no connections, no power. She's already won. She hasn't won anything. Kieran crossed to her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You're not alone anymore, Ivy. You have me, and I have very good solicitors. A laugh escaped her. Small, surprised, almost painful. You'd do that? Fight a legal battle for a woman you just met? I'd do considerably more than that. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I don't understand, she whispered. None of this makes sense. An hour ago, I was wandering the roads with nowhere to go. Now the Lycan king is offering to wage war on my stepmother? Not war. Justice. He reached out slowly and touched her chin, tilting her face up to his. There's a difference. She should pull away. She should maintain distance, protect herself, remember that trusting people only led to pain. But his touch was gentle. His eyes were warm, and for the first time since her father died, she didn't feel alone. You'll stay here tonight, Kieran said. In the morning, we'll talk more. Figure out what you want, what you need. His thumb brushed across her jaw. I meant what I said. You're my mate. But I'm not going to force that on you. I'm not going to demand anything you're not ready to give. What if I'm never ready? Then I'll wait. His lips quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. I've been waiting 261 years. I can wait a little longer. He released her and stepped back, and Ivy felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. Eat, he said again, nodding toward the food. Rest. Tomorrow will be better. He turned to leave, and before she could think better of it, she called out, Kieran? He stopped, turned. Something flickered in his golden eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. Thank you, she said, for saving me, for all of this. That almost smile appeared again. You don't have to thank me, Ivy. You never have to thank me for treating you the way you deserve to be treated. And then he was gone, and she was alone with the fire and the food and the dizzying, terrifying, impossible possibility that maybe, just maybe, her luck had finally changed. She didn't trust it. But as she sank into the chair and reached for the first real meal she'd had in weeks, she found herself hoping anyway. The nightmare came for her just before dawn. She was back on the road, but this time there was no wolf to save her. The men's hands were everywhere, grabbing, tearing, holding her down, and she screamed, but no sound came out. She screamed until her throat was raw, and still nobody came. Ivy! Ivy! Wake up! Her eyes flew open. Kieran knelt beside her bed, his face inches from hers. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting silver across his features. His golden eyes were wide with concern, and his hands hovered near her shoulders without touching. You're safe, he said. It was just a dream. You're safe here. She was gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat, her heart slamming against her ribs. The remnants of the nightmare clung to her, the hands, the laughter, the helplessness. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. I didn't mean to wake you. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. Don't. His voice was firm, but gentle. Don't apologize for being afraid. And don't ever apologize for needing help. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the terrifying wolf from the road with this man who knelt at her bedside in the dark, speaking to her like she was something fragile and precious. How did you know? She whispered. That I was having a nightmare? I heard you scream. His jaw tightened. These walls are thick, but not thick enough to block that sound. She flushed with embarrassment. I didn't realize I was making noise. At home, at my stepmother's house, I learned to be silent. Crying only made things worse. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. What do you mean, worse? Ivy looked away. She hadn't meant to say that. The words had slipped out, dragged from somewhere deep that she usually kept locked tight. Ivy? His voice was soft, patient. What did she do to you? The silence stretched between them. Ivy stared at the embroidered coverlet on her bed, tracing the silver threads with her eyes, trying to decide how much to reveal. When I cried, she finally said, she would lock me in the cellar. She said it was to teach me self-control, that a proper lady didn't weep and wail like a child. Her hands twisted in the bedding. Sometimes she left me there for days, until I learned to stop making sounds. Kieran went very still. When she finally looked at him, his face was carved from stone, but his eyes blazed with barely contained fury. How old were you? 12, the first time. It got less frequent as I got older. I learned what she wanted, how to be invisible, how to take up no space. A bitter laugh escaped her. She used to say I was too much, too loud, too needy, too emotional. So I made myself less of everything, until there was barely anything left. She was wrong. The words came out rough, like they'd been torn from him. Everything she told you was a lie designed to break you. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. You always have been. Ivy shook her head. You don't know that. You don't know me. I know enough. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip impossibly gentle. I know that you survived. I know that despite everything they did to diminish you, there's still a fire in you. I saw it on the road, when you tried to run from those men instead of freezing. I see it now, in the way you question me, instead of just accepting what I say. He lifted her hand to his chest, pressing it flat over his heart. She could feel it beating, steady, strong, reassuring. You are not too much, he said quietly. You are not a burden. You are not worthless or weak, or any of the other lies she planted in your head. His golden eyes held hers. You are treasure, Ivy, and anyone who made you feel otherwise was a fool. The tears came before she could stop them. She hadn't cried since her father's funeral, hadn't allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she'd lost, everything she'd endured. But now, with Kieran's hand holding hers, and his words cracking open something she'd kept sealed for years, the dam finally broke. She wept, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. All the grief and fear and loneliness she'd been carrying for months, for years, poured out of her in a flood she couldn't control. Kieran didn't tell her to stop. He didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he moved onto the bed beside her and gathered her into his arms. She should have pushed him away, should have maintained the distance, the walls, the careful emptiness she'd cultivated to survive. But she was so tired of being strong, so tired of carrying everything alone. She let him hold her. He held her like she was precious, like she was breakable, but worth protecting anyway. His hand stroked her hair, slow and soothing, and he murmured words she couldn't quite make out, but that settled something in her chest nonetheless. When the storm finally passed, Ivy found herself pressed against him, her cheek on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She should have been mortified. She'd just sobbed in the arms of the Lycan king like a child. I'm sorry, she mumbled against his shirt. Stop apologizing. There was a hint of warmth in his voice now. I told you. Never apologize for needing help. I don't do this. Fall apart on strangers. I'm not a stranger. His arms tightened around her. I'm your mate, even if you don't believe it yet. She pulled back just enough to look at him. In the moonlight, with his hair mussed and his shirt damp from her tears, he looked less like a legendary king and more like a man who had held her while she broke and hadn't once made her feel weak for it. My wolf, she said quietly. She's awake. Kieran's eyes flared brighter. What? I've barely felt her my whole life. Everyone said she was too weak, practically non-existent. But right now, Ivy pressed a hand to her chest. She's there. I can feel her. And she's what? Reaching toward you. The admission came out barely above a whisper, like she recognizes something. Kieran's expression shifted. The careful control cracked, and underneath she glimpsed something raw and desperate and full of longing. That's the bond, he said roughly. She feels what I feel, what my wolf feels. He reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her tear-stained cheek. You're not weak, Ivy. Your wolf was never weak. She was dormant, waiting, protecting you until it was safe for her to wake. Safe? Until you found me. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. Until you found your home. They were so close. Close enough that she could feel his breath on her lips, could see the gold bleeding into amber in his eyes. Her wolf was practically howling, straining toward him, and every nerve in her body was alight with awareness. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes. And she wanted him to. Wanted it with a desperation that frightened her. But he pulled back. Not yet, he murmured, his voice strained. Not while you're still hurting. Not while you might regret it in the morning. I wouldn't. You might. He pressed a kiss to her forehead instead, soft, tender, achingly restrained. When I kiss you for the first time, I want you to be certain. I want you to choose it with a clear head and an open heart. Not because you're overwhelmed and grateful and confused. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt bereft. Kieran eased back, putting distance between them, though his hand still held hers. Sleep, he said. I'll stay until you do. And if the nightmares come back, I'll be here. You don't have to. I want to. His golden eyes were soft. Let me take care of you, Ivy. Just for tonight. Let someone else carry the weight. She didn't know how to respond. No one had ever offered to carry anything for her. No one had ever stayed. So she simply nodded and lay back against the pillows, her hand still wrapped in his. She was asleep within minutes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the nightmares didn't return. When she woke with the dawn, he was gone. But the warmth where he'd been still lingered on the sheets. And so did the terrifying, wonderful realization settling into her bones. She was falling for him, the Lycan king, the man who held her while she broke and called her treasure, the man who waited. She was falling, and she had no idea how to stop. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Lady Ashford arrived on the third day. Ivy was in the manor's library when she heard the commotion, raised voices at the front entrance, the clatter of footsteps, and then a sound that made her blood run cold. I demand to see my stepdaughter. You cannot keep her from me. She was on her feet before she could think, her body responding to years of conditioned fear. That voice, that sharp, imperious voice that had whispered cruelties in her ear for a decade. She'd thought she was free of it. She'd thought. The library doors burst open. Lady Ashford swept in like a vengeful storm, her travelling cloak still swirling around her shoulders. Behind her, two of the manor's guards followed helplessly, clearly uncertain how to handle a noblewoman who refused to be stopped. There you are. Her stepmother's pale eyes found Ivy, and her lips curved into something that might have been a smile on anyone else. Playing house with the Lycan king, I see. How quickly you've landed on your feet. Ivy forced herself to stand straight, though every instinct screamed at her to shrink, to disappear, to become the invisible girl she'd learned to be. "What are you doing here?" "Collecting what's mine, of course." Lady Ashford glanced around the library with thinly veiled disdain. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? The whole territory is buzzing with gossip. The king's mysterious guest, the Omega girl he pulled from the road. It didn't take long to connect the pieces." "I'm not yours to collect." Ivy's voice came out steadier than she expected. "You threw me out. You told me I had nothing." "A temporary measure." Her stepmother waved a dismissive hand. "I was angry. Your father's death was difficult. I may have acted rashly." The lie was so blatant it nearly made Ivy laugh. Rashly, as if years of cruelty had been a momentary lapse in judgment. "What do you really want?" Lady Ashford's mask slipped, just for a moment. Underneath, Ivy glimpsed something desperate, something afraid. "The king's solicitors have been asking questions." Her stepmother's voice went cold. "About your father's will, about the circumstances of his death, about certain documents that may have been altered." Ivy's heart stuttered. Altered? Lies, of course. Malicious rumours spread by jealous servants. Lady Ashford stepped closer, and her voice dropped to a hiss. "But if those lies reach the wrong ears, it could be very unpleasant. For both of us." "For you, you mean?" "For you as well." Her stepmother's eyes glittered. "Do you think the king will want you once he learns the truth? That your father's gambling debts were paid off by my money? That without me, your family would have been destitute years ago? You owe me everything, Ivy. Your education, your food, the roof over your head. And this is how you repay me? By running to a powerful man and spinning tales?" The words hit their mark. Ivy felt the old shame creeping back, the familiar weight of obligation settling on her shoulders. Maybe Lady Ashford was right. Maybe she did owe her something. Maybe... "That's enough." Kieran's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, filling the frame with his massive shoulders, his golden eyes blazing with cold fury. Behind him, a half-dozen guards waited in formation. Lady Ashford turned, and for the first time, Ivy saw real fear flicker across her face. But she recovered quickly, smoothing her expression into something simpering. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the intrusion. I was simply trying to retrieve my wayward stepdaughter." "Your stepdaughter is exactly where she belongs." Kieran strode into the room, each footfall deliberate. "And you are trespassing in my home." "I meant no offense. I was merely concerned for her welfare." "Were you concerned for her welfare when you locked her in a cellar for crying?" Kieran's voice was terrifyingly soft. "Were you concerned when you starved her, isolated her, told her she was worthless? Were you concerned when you forged her father's will and stole her inheritance?" Lady Ashford's face went pale. "I don't know what lies she's told you, but they're not lies." Kieran stopped directly in front of her, and even from across the room, Ivy could see her stepmother shrink. "My solicitors have been very thorough. They found the original will, the real one, hidden in your late husband's study. The one that left everything to his daughter. The one you replaced with a forgery 3 days after his death." Ivy's knees went weak. She reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. The original will. Everything left to her. It had been real. Her father hadn't abandoned her. "Furthermore," Kieran continued, "they've uncovered evidence suggesting your husband's death was not the accident it was reported to be. The hunting party that day included 2 men in your personal employ. men who have since fled the territory. You can't prove anything. But Lady Ashford's voice had gone thin, her composure cracking. I can prove enough. Kieran leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl. Enough to strip you of everything you stole. Enough to see you imprisoned for fraud. Or worse, if the murder investigation bears fruit. His golden eyes burned. You are finished, Lady Ashford. The only question is how much you'll lose before the end. For a moment, Ivy thought her stepmother might crumble, might confess, might beg, might finally show some shred of humanity. Instead, Lady Ashford turned to Ivy with venom in her eyes. You ungrateful little wretch. The words dripped with hatred. I took you in when no one else would. I fed you, clothed you, gave you a place in society. And this is my reward? You spread your legs for a king, and suddenly you think you're something special? Ivy flinched. The words cut deep, finding all the soft places she'd tried to protect. But then something shifted inside her. She thought about the girl who had walked out of that house with nothing but her mother's locket and a handful of coins. She thought about the woman who had survived the road, survived the attack, survived years of being told she was nothing. She thought about Kieran, who had seen her at her lowest and called her treasure. And she realized with sudden blazing clarity that she was done shrinking. You didn't take me in out of kindness. Ivy stepped forward, her voice steady. You took me in because my father came with money you wanted. And when that money ran out, when he was no longer useful, you got rid of him. Just like you tried to get rid of me. How dare you? I'm not finished. The words came out sharp, and Lady Ashford actually fell silent. I spent 10 years believing I was worthless because you told me I was. I made myself small, quiet, invisible, because you convinced me that was all I deserved. But you were wrong. She stepped closer, and something in her expression made her stepmother back away. I am not worthless. I am not a burden. I am not something to be discarded when I'm no longer convenient. Her voice rose, strengthening with every word. I am my father's daughter. I am my mother's legacy, and I am done letting you make me feel like I'm nothing. Silence fell over the library. Kieran was staring at her with something like wonder on his face. The guards shifted uncertainly, and Lady Ashford, for the first time in Ivy's memory, had nothing to say. Get her out of my sight, Ivy said quietly. The guards moved instantly, taking Lady Ashford by the arms and steering her toward the door. She struggled, spitting curses and threats, but they held firm. Just before they dragged her through the doorway, she looked back at Ivy with pure hatred. He'll tire of you, she hissed. They always do. You're nothing, Ivy. You'll always be nothing. She's wrong. Kieran's voice was rough. Ivy turned to find him standing close, so close she could feel the heat of him, could see the gold burning in his eyes. She's wrong, he repeated. You're not nothing. You're everything. And then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was fierce and desperate, and 261 years of waiting finally unleashed. His hands cupped her face, tilting her head back, and she grabbed fistfuls of his shirt and pulled him closer. She kissed him like he was air, and she was drowning. She kissed him like she was finally choosing something for herself. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Mine, he growled against her lips. Yours, she agreed. And you're mine. His smile was fierce and tender and full of promise. Always. The bonding ceremony took place 1 month later, on the night of the winter solstice. Ivy stood before the mirror in the Queen's chambers, chambers that would officially become hers after tonight, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The gown was deep forest green, embroidered with silver wolves that seemed to dance in the candlelight. Her dark hair had been woven with winter roses, and her mother's locket gleamed at her throat, exactly where it belonged. She looked like a queen. More importantly, she felt like one. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Helena, the elderly maid who had taken Ivy under her wing from her first day at the manor, entered with tears already glistening in her eyes. "Oh, my lady, you're a vision." "I don't feel like a vision." But she was smiling as she said it. "I feel like I might float away." Every bride feels that way. Helena crossed to her and took both her hands. "His Majesty has been pacing the Great Hall for an hour. I've never seen him so anxious. You'd think he was facing an army, not a bonding." Something warm unfurled in Ivy's chest. "He's anxious?" "Terrified you'll change your mind, I'd wager." Helena's eyes softened. "That man has waited his whole life for you, my lady, and now that he has you, he can barely believe his fortune." Ivy blinked back the sting of tears. She couldn't cry. Not yet. The ceremony hadn't even started. "I'm ready," she said. The great hall had been transformed. Thousands of candles lined the ancient stone walls, their golden light reflecting off polished silver and gleaming crystal. Winter flowers cascaded from every surface: white roses, silver thistle, sprigs of evergreen, filling the air with sweetness. And filling the hall were hundreds of witnesses, nobles, pack leaders, dignitaries from every territory in the realm, all gathered to watch the Lycan king take his mate. But Ivy barely saw any of it. She only saw Kieran. He stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in black and silver, looking every inch the legendary king. But his eyes, those golden eyes that had seen centuries of war and loss and waiting, were fixed on her with an expression that made her heart stop. Love. Pure, overwhelming, unguarded love. He looked at her like she was the dawn breaking after an endless night. She walked toward him on steady legs, her fear dissolving with every step. This was right. This was where she belonged. Every terrible thing that had happened to her, the cruelty, the loss, the years of being told she was worthless, had led her here, to him. When she reached him, he took her hands, and the trembling in his fingers told her everything she needed to know. "You came," he breathed, so quietly only she could hear. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Part of me still can't believe any of this is real." His voice was rough with emotion. "That you're real. That you chose me." Ivy squeezed his hands. "I'll keep choosing you. Every day. For as long as you'll have me." "Forever, then." His lips curved. "I'll have you forever." The ceremony was ancient and beautiful. Vows spoken in the old tongue, promises exchanged under a canopy of candlelight and winter stars visible through the hall's high windows. When the officiant asked if she would accept Kieran as her mate, her partner, her equal, Ivy's voice rang clear through the hall. "I will." And when Kieran spoke his vows, his voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "I have lived for 261 years, he said, "and I have spent most of them alone. I built an empire, commanded armies, accumulated power that most men only dream of. But I was hollow, a shell going through the motions of living without ever truly being alive." His grip on her hands tightened. "And then I found you. A woman on a dark road, with nothing but her mother's locket and more courage than she knew. A woman who had been told her whole life that she was worthless, and who was just starting to realize how wrong they were. His golden eyes burned into hers. You taught me that strength isn't about power or conquest. It's about surviving the darkness and still choosing to hope. It's about standing up when everyone expects you to stay down. It's about being brave enough to accept love when you've been given every reason to fear it. Tears spilled down Ivy's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. I love you, Ivy. I will love you until the stars burn out and the mountains crumble to dust. And I will spend every day of my very long life making sure you never doubt your worth again. The officiant pronounced them bonded, and Kieran kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. The hall erupted in cheers, but Ivy barely heard them. All she knew was his lips on hers, his arms around her, his heart beating against her own. She was his queen now. She was home. 1 year later. Ivy stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun set over the snow-covered grounds. The same grounds she had stumbled across in the darkness a year ago, fleeing a home that had never truly been hers, expecting nothing but more pain. So much had changed since then. Lady Ashford was imprisoned in the capital dungeons, awaiting trial for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. The investigation had uncovered everything: the forged will, the payments to the men who had arranged her father's accident, the years of embezzlement from the estate. She would spend the rest of her life paying for her crimes. And Ivy's father's estate, her estate now, restored to her by royal decree, had been converted into a sanctuary for others like her. Young women cast out by cruel families, Omegas dismissed as worthless, anyone who needed a safe place to land. Ivy had named it Haven House, and it was already full. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Kieran's chest with a contented sigh. "You're thinking loud thoughts again," he murmured against her hair. "I can practically hear them." She smiled. "Good thoughts. I was remembering the night we met. The night I found you on that road, half frozen and terrified, with 3 men closing in on you." His arms tightened. "I try not to think about what would have happened if I hadn't been there." "But you were there." She turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. "You saved me, and then you kept saving me over and over until I learned to save myself. You always knew how to save yourself." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You just needed someone to remind you." Ivy thought about the girl who had walked out of her stepmother's house with nothing, convinced she was worthless. She thought about the woman who had stood in a library and finally claimed her own voice. She thought about everything she had survived and everything she had gained. "She told me to leave before nightfall," Ivy said quietly. "She said if I was still there when the sun set, she'd have me dragged out." "And what did I tell you?" Ivy smiled, remembering. "You told me to stay." "Best decision I ever made." Kieran's golden eyes were soft with love. "Telling you to stay, convincing you that you belonged with me. You didn't have to convince me of anything." She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his jaw. "You just had to show me what it felt like to be wanted. The rest was easy." He laughed, a low, warm sound that still made her heart flutter even after a year. "Easy. She says it was easy." "Fine. Terrifying. Overwhelming. Life-changing." She grinned up at him. "But worth it." "Worth it," he agreed. "Every moment." He kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing a question he'd asked her 100 times before. Ivy thought about the girl who had been told to leave before nightfall, who had expected to spend her life alone and unwanted. She thought about the woman who had found her voice, her strength, her home. "Not a single one," she said. And as Kieran pulled her closer, as the stars blazed to life above them and the snow glittered below, Ivy finally understood what it meant to stay. She had been cast out once, dismissed, told she was nothing. Now she was loved. She was home. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And she would never let anyone make her forget it again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Until next time.